I'll tell you one other story, and then I'm going to have to cut short.
Okay.
Something I didn't tell Moshe. I don't know who I've told. My mother told this to a few people, but to me it's an amazing story. She reminded me of this either before Pesach this year or before Pesach last year. At the very end of the war, it was April 1945. They couldn't live in Berlin anymore. Berlin, the Russians were blasting Berlin to pieces. So they were in the suburbs of Berlin. And my grandmother had a problem. This is going back many years already. She had a problem. She was a religious woman. She was a widow, but she had to cover her hair. How does it, you can't cover your hair and be a religious woman and be in Nazi Germany. They just don't go together. So it became fashionable around 1941, that when the wife of an SS officer, when her husband was killed in action, the fashion was to wear a black kerchief around their hair. So my grandmother, my grandfather who had already been killed, was perfect, and she wore a black kerchief around her head. It's now the end of the war. It's April 1945, and a lot of camps, they were shuffling prisoners in between camps. They didn't know where to take them anymore. But they were still being used as slave labor when they're not being murdered, or before they were murdered. And there was a group of, I forget now if it was 10 or 12 men, and if you needed help to farm or whatever it was, you ask us for prisoners, we'll give you feed them. You don't want to feed them, don't feed them, whatever you want. Give us prisoners. And they gave my mother, my grandmother, 10 prisoners, 12 prisoners, and they were pink. These were grown men and they were pink. So they didn't understand why. And the story came out afterwards that they'd been working with very dangerous chemicals. And the chemicals had turned their skin pink. They were obviously starving. You know what the concentration camp survivors looked like after the war. They gave them to my grandmother because she's the widow of an SS officer. We're not going to give her slaves. Take them. During the day, she let them relax. She gave them something light to eat, some bread or whatever. That night, she had them gather around, it wasn't a table, gather around something on the floor. It was a sheet or whatever. And on the sheet was some herbs, and there was a potato, and there was something, it wasn't bread, it was hard, it looked something like matzah, and the prisoners was talking amongst themselves in a very low voice, because it looks like matzah, and they knew it was around Pesach time, because that looks like this, because they didn't know what was going on, and my mother, who was wearing a swastika obviously, she started to sing Manishtana.
Right.
Which was a shocking thing to hear.
Must have been a huge shock to them.
Now, forget about a huge shock. They'd come from the middle of Poland to Berlin. They hadn't seen another Jew. And the outskirts of Berlin, and this happened in different situations, they're going to find 2 living Jews wearing swastikas, making a Pesach Suda. They didn't make a Suda, obviously, but they had a couple of things that you need to make a
matzah, whatever you could do. Yeah,
close to matzah. And they had the herb, they had a potato, they had something. So it turns out all of these men had been rabbis before.
Wow.
And they did whatever they could for Pesach that night. My mother and her mother had each been given a 30-day supply of food, because the woman that she'd been hiding with said, we don't know what's going to be. You may have to leave at a moment's notice. So have the supply of food. It's good for 30 days. They gave the whole supply over to these concentration camp victims. The food's for you. Now you're going to ask me, what did they eat? What do they eat now? So,
right.
They took a pot, they took boiling water, they took grass, and they took tree bark. They boiled it all together and they made them soup, and then some soup, and that's what they lived on for a month. Almost 5 weeks.
And you're asking what kind of skills your mother has?
Well, I know.
You should be asking
that's
that
true.
question.
I don't know what I was thinking. But think about that now. Now, there are certain trees, I don't know if you know, there's certain trees that are nutritious, and there's certain types of grass that are also nutritious.
Right.
They apparently knew. So they took the grass, they took the tree bark, and that's what they lived on. So it tasted horrible. It damaged their stomachs, especially the wood damaged their stomach, but they survived.
Right.
And everyone in this story that I'm telling you survived the war. They were never given back over to the Nazis, and they were liberated together.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing, Scus. You
On
want to
the
be
very
jealous
last
of
day
such
of
custom, but we